listening to Pharmacy, IT, and Me, your informatics pharmacist podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Pharmacy, IT, and Me podcast. And I'm your host, Tony. And actually joining me today, I'm pretty excited to talk to is Dr. Andrew McLaughlin. And I've actually met Andrew through ASHP before and also kind of worked with him a little bit on and off just with the EHR that I am currently using at the health system that I'm at and also previously. So good to have you here today, Andrew. How are you doing?
Pretty well, thank you.
Awesome. So before we get started to talk a little bit more deeper about your role and everything, can you kind of tell listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So Andrew McLaughlin, pharmacist by background. I did my undergrad and postgrad studies all at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. So I did my undergrad in chemistry, and then after I completed that, kind of transitioned into pharmacy school. So I started out during undergrad working at Walgreens after my freshman year. So I started out as a technician, and then, as I got further into chemistry and was working at Walgreens for a while, kind of wanted to blend the two things and make the chemistry I was learning kind of practical, and pharmacy seemed like a natural route for that. So, went into pharmacy school at Creighton, and then, kind of how I got into kind of pharmacy overall after that is, I think my first week in pharmacy school, I was attending one of these like pharmacy kind of job fairs or kind of career fairs that was happening. And I stumbled into this booth for bioscience entrepreneurship program that they were having. So I kind of got interested in that. And as part of that bioscience entrepreneurship program, basically the goal of that was to kind of understand how, the business of life sciences and healthcare in general, kind of the business lines of it a bit. So as part of that, I also kind of started my MBA program and kind of got more familiar with different sorts of business practices and the lens on that sort of thing. So I completed both the MBA programs, bioscience entrepreneurship program, and the pharmacy program down there at Creighton as well. So as part of the bioscience entrepreneurship program, one of the things that we did there was kind of start to understand, business plan development and intellectual property rights and stuff like that. And the capstone of that program was actually doing you could either work on somebody else's business idea and build up a business plan around it, or we had the opportunity to build our own business and business plan. So I chose the latter. So as part of the capstone program, we set up a business that I called RX Quote at the time. It was, an LLC. And then we, looked into different sorts of patent things and getting trademarks and registering domains and hiring out, contracting out for engineers to start working on some of those projects. So, it was kind of a learning by doing sort of program. But, this was all kind of coming at the same time as the kind of Medicare Part D process was happening. So when I was working at Walgreens, basically at the time we were trying to help patients identify which Medicare Part D plan was best for them based on the medications that they had. So, I was interested in maybe that same sort of idea could be applied within the commercial setting and helping patients find, health plans that are best for them based on the meds they were taking. So that was kind of the genesis of this. And then, figured we'd try to build out a business around it. So we did a bunch of, mobile apps and websites and stuff like that over the years, trying to, to make that work. And while none of those were overly successful, it was kind of helpful in just kind of understanding, thinking about how to build a product from scratch and working with engineers and trying to accommodate the various things that need to be accomplished, bringing a product to life, basically. So that's kind of where, I cut my teeth, I guess, in the pharmacy and business world. And as we're getting to the end of pharmacy school and going through rotations in the last year of pharmacy school, I think it became apparent to me that, I'm not necessarily the greatest clinician, or that I could work 40 hours a week in a retail pharmacy. So I started looking for kind of alternative kind of career paths within pharmacy. So I looked into pharmaceutical industry fellowships and working at PBMs. And then, eventually found myself on a job search website and kind of stumbled across Cerner at the time. So Cerner, now Oracle Health, is where I kind of started right out of pharmacy school. So during that process, this was I graduated pharmacy school in 2012. So this is kind of the height of the High Tech Act. And so the government in the US was, incentivizing healthcare organizations to adopt electronic medical records. And, I think Cerner at the time needed a pharmacist to put on the front lines of some of our hospital organizations' implementation efforts. And so I was, willing to take a lower kind of salary to do that and, get my foot in the door in kind of the healthcare IT space. And then I was kind of off and running at Cerner. So I started out my Cerner career in the consulting space, doing implementations of our electronic medical record, specifically within our pharmacy and medication process space, and helping organizations kind of set up the EHR overall. I did that for a couple of years, and then was asked to take on an opportunity within our optimization services team. So this would be more organizations that have been using our electronic medical records for several years, and they're looking to optimize it in different ways, different sorts of configuration, or utilize different capabilities. So I helped do a lot of those optimization assessments and implementations of, recommendations in that regard. And then, kind of took on, had a cup of coffee in population health, optimization space, and adding kind of the people and process side of things in addition to technology. Before I was offered an opportunity to move into our sales alignment organization. So I wasn't getting people to sign contracts per se, but I was responsible for demonstrating essentially all of our medication process related solution offerings, from prescriber order entry to pharmacist verification, and then medication dispensing, medication administration, and clinical decision support. So the opportunity kind of took me all over the world, kind of in addition to our US organizations that either already had our system or were looking at purchasing our EHR. I was doing the same sort of thing internationally in the Middle East and Australia and things like that too. So, I think that role also got me some exposure to how contracting works and how RFPs work, and, understanding some of the differences in patient care that exists both domestically and abroad. So I was in that role for a couple of years before getting offered the opportunity to move into product management. So my time in product management, I started out in our outpatient pharmacy product. So our outpatient pharmacy product, which is part of our core EHR, is used to facilitate the dispensing of prescriptions. And so with that product, this was around the time that we started to engage or have projects with our federal customers. And so there's a lot of unique patient care needs and ways in which patient care is facilitated within the U.S. federal market. So we had some development associated with our outpatient pharmacy product to support those, unique federal needs in addition to commercial capabilities. So I did that for a few years before transitioning to my current role. So in my current role, I'm a director of product management. I have responsibilities over our medication dispensing product portfolio. So in addition to that outpatient pharmacy product that's part of our EHR, we've also historically had a retail pharmacy product that was EHR agnostic, and it's used not only in health systems, but independent pharmacies. And then our inpatient pharmacy product is probably the most broadly used and most familiar among, the folks listening to the call here or the podcast here. And then I have the medication dispensing side of things. So we have our own medication dispensing hardware, medication dispensing cabinets, as well as anesthesia carts. And then we also have kind of advanced interoperability with different vendors in the space, such as Omnicell and EDPixis, and then kind of SunRx for our 340B side of things. So that's a bit about me, the history of me in my current role, but hopefully that helps provide some context on kind of how I got to where I'm at.
Yeah, that was a lot of information. And thanks for, sharing all that. I did want to say, I noticed that you said you started off in 2012. That's actually also when I started in pharmacy informatics, right after graduation. And you worked as a delivery consultant. I'm wondering if you know the ones I worked with. For us, we had a Lori 2 and Garrett Thompson that was part of our implementation for Cerner over at my employment. Did you ever work?
I know both of them well. I still work with Garrett on a regular basis. He's in product management at this point too. He kind of oversees a lot of our orders and clinical decision support, like MCDS sort of stuff. So yeah, very familiar.
Awesome. Yeah. I remember Garrett. I think that was also when he was starting off, or around when he was starting off. there was a lot of diligence on his end of when there was an issue, he would like not stop until he found out why. Like it was really cool to kind of see the thought process going from his mind. And I was new at the time, like completely new. So it was cool to kind of see like, okay, this is how people are looking at issues and this is how they're triaging. This is how they're like approaching it in this certain way. This is how they're getting people involved, like what questions to ask. So it's really cool to kind of see that from like, pharmacy delivery consultant. And I think it's also really interesting because working from the EHR vendor side, you don't know what the hospital's workflow is. So that there's that extra layer that makes it a little bit more difficult for your role, right? That you kind of like have to work through. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things that's unique about pharmacy and pharmacy IT in general, in my opinion, is like we kind of sit at the epicenter of healthcare, from my perspective. A little bit biased as a pharmacist, but like, we kind of need to know how different sorts of prescribers and clinicians are going to order medication related items. And then obviously as the role of the pharmacist, we need to, have clinical discretion around, was this order put in correctly? And therefore I need to verify it, but also how does it need to be dispensed? And also knowing who our consumers of those dispensing actions are, probably it's the patient, maybe it's administered by the nurse, but like you kind of need to know each one of those different stakeholders kind of workflows and what they're doing to not only facilitate your day-to-day work, but kind of make sure that the system is designed to accommodate all those different kind of user stories and, what they're trying to do and the outcomes they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, I guess, can you kind of describe to the listeners back when you were doing more of like the, delivery consultant, architect, and solution advisor type of roles? Like, what do those roles entail? And then we can kind of talk about the product management side after that.
Yeah. I mean, so kind of depends on the type of project. If it's, a new implementation of like the EHR at a hospital, for example, it's a much larger project. So there's generally like, depends on how big of a project it is, but, a year-long project plan, for example. And, you have stepwise processes of doing different sorts of configuration, testing, integrated testing events throughout there. And, vendors like ourselves are going to have like our best practice recommendations that we have as kind of the out of the box suggestion. But then as we kind of work with an organization, understanding that the patient care needs or the way that patient care is facilitated varies, you kind of tweak those standard recommendations to kind of fit your needs. And then, again, within the pharmacy space, we say pharmacy, but we kind of touch everything medication related. So again, order entry, pharmacy verification, dispensing, and then medication administration all kind of flow through pharmacy to some degree. So it's a lot of meetings and configuration, validation of configuration and testing that kind of happens in the consulting space, and, talking through different sorts of clinical workflows and the extent to which our, different sorts of technology solutions can accommodate those, or how do we need to think creatively to do something that's a little outside the box.
So, like when you moved into the role of a product manager and then you went into the role of like, the director of product management for the pharmacy space, what kind of like responsibilities changed, and how did your kind of experience being kind of boots on the ground with delivery consultant, how did that kind of help you with, being a successful like product and management director like today?
Yeah. I mean, I think my experience in product management, at least, has been that product managers are asked to wear a lot of different hats. In addition to like what most people view product management to be in terms of like, the developments of solutions for different sorts of customer requests or issues that may exist out there in terms of enhancements or defect corrections and stuff like that, and working with engineering to design those capabilities and get them, released and available to customers. There's a lot of other kind of hats you have to wear. Consulting is one of them. So in order to figure out the right sort of engineering solution, you also need to know what sort of existing configuration capabilities are out there today, and how will this newly proposed development, impact those, and like what's the kind of passivity of considerations there. Things that, from a product development perspective, maybe we don't have in the very near term for development. We also kind of need to think through what configuration tools and do we have at our disposal to ultimately like meet the workflow need. So I think having that consulting background and understanding, the configuration and implementation of capabilities has been very impactful for me, and just figuring out not only how do we, design and develop the right solutions for problems, but how do we make sure that those can be pushed out and adopted ultimately is kind of the end goal here. So having that context has been beneficial, and that's in addition to some of the other things you need to do in product management related to, understanding, how the product is being supported and how it's sold, and, working with different sorts of third-party vendors when you're trying to do interoperability for particular capabilities. So consulting has definitely been, foundational to helping build up the knowledge I have within product management today, and kind of how we operate on a day-to-day basis now.
And so your background is, of course, you got your pharmacy degree. And how do you think like that, like why is that so important in this role of, you're a director in product management for the pharmacy and medication dispensing portion of Oracle? And why does it have to be someone that's a pharmacist? I mean, it kind of sounds like a obvious answer, but I just want to hear your take on it.
I mean, I think in general, what's important in healthcare IT is people who can speak to clinicians and, understand the clinical aspects of their workflow, and then translate that back into, information technology and engineering and things like that. And then conversely, understand what the engineers and different sorts of IT folks are saying, and translate that back into the clinical side of things. So kind of being a bridge that understands both the IT side of it as well as the healthcare side of it. They're very kind of complementary to one another. And again, a bit biased here as a pharmacist, but like I feel like pharmacists just think the right way, for lack of a better term. We're very analytical people. We pay attention to details. We have that healthcare perspective that kind of is 360 for, again, the order entry side of things, as well as the medication administration side of things, in addition to core pharmacy. So I think pharmacists in general are uniquely positioned to succeed within healthcare IT, and being a clinician in healthcare IT is beneficial. And, if you can, speak both languages of IT and clinical to varying stakeholders.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And I was curious about like your role in product management. Like what has been probably, what sticks out as like one of your biggest challenges that you try to overcome in this role?
So many good ideas for enhancements out there, and so many different ways in which healthcare is practiced, not only domestically, but globally as well. We got healthcare organizations that use our products all over the world. And there's different sorts of regulatory considerations. There's different ways in which care is practiced and interoperability is facilitated. So, there is always going to be a long roadmap and backlog of enhancement requests of good ideas that require the right level of, understanding and implementation and like prioritization, I guess. So I guess I was, in my consulting role, I had plenty of these hopefully good ideas at times around enhancements as well. But I think I didn't necessarily understand quite the volume until I kind of was faced with it and having to go through those individually, and, not only understand it, like if I understand the request, but like, the applicability of that across different sorts of patient care scenarios, and how to prioritize among, a very long list of a backlog of enhancement requests, which ones to prioritize and why, I think was the biggest learning lesson for me over time.
I see. So, I mean, like, how is that approach? Because, Oracle's not just the US, it's global. Like everybody in the world, you have clients all over the world. So how would it be approached when there's all these like requests for certain enhancements? Like, is there like a kind of like a guided process, or, already like a checklist of things you need to do to like prioritize these? Or is there like, is it like a popularity contest? Like, like how does this approach go with Oracle?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for it, across all the different Oracle products, but I would say in general that there's both an art and a science to it. There is a balance between, customer demands for particular features and other sorts of enhancements that are required from like a regulatory perspective, in addition to like the volume of demand, I think, and the work effort, frankly. There's different levels of enhancement requests require different levels of work effort to accommodate them. So that's just some other factor that kind of comes into the weighting that is done for the items that are out there. And then to your points, like, how broad of an impact is this going to be? And what is the impact? Is it going to be patient care? Is it financial? Is it operational efficiencies? So there's different sorts of kind of value weighting factors in there too. And so kind of putting those things together, we try to weight those the best we can to make those sorts of decisions on what's the next thing up and what's the thing that's going to be up, 6 months from now or a year from now, etc.
I see. So I know you talked about, working with all these different engineers and kind of being the intermediary between clinical and T. And I was just wondering, like, for your role, do you have like a typical day to day you want to share, or is every day different? Like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, this kind of varies. I would say, there's, common meetings that I have with our engineering team and different, the product managers who report underneath me, as well as, standing meetings that I may have with other internal stakeholder groups and like organizations like our consulting or our support team, for example, or with, particular customers that, I have a relationship with and we're working on something together on. So there's kind of standing meetings, but I guess in general, my day to day is largely consists of kind of coordination across these stakeholder groups, so our customers, I do a lot of like vendor partner management, particularly when we have like interoperability capabilities or, things like that. Working with our consulting team or sales team or support team, I try to produce a lot of content in terms of like presentations or, providing different sorts of PowerPoints that people can use as kind of hopefully evergreen content and doing different sorts of stakeholder outreach. I also find myself being asked to be a subject matter expert on, a lot of different capabilities. Thankfully, that goes well most of the time. And then I guess just in general, like on a day-to-day basis, we're always having conversations around, enhancements and design associated with capabilities and, defects, corrections and prioritization, among those different items.
I want to make a comment about the content you create. I want to say thank you. Because I remember the organization when I first joined here, I got this thick packet of like pharmacy optimizations and they were asking me about like reviewing whether these should go in or not. And so I was looking through it and it was so detailed on like all the steps that would, need to be taken,
Mm-hmm.
and then all the impact, and then the author was you. So thank you for that. So I guess like, I don't know if you knew that, but I basically was the point person to kind of review that when I started the role here.
If I was overwhelmed, I'm trying to be, I work on being concise over time. It's still a work in progress as some of my prior comments probably you could tell.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good to be detailed. I think like it helps for people who, specifically for me, like in my role, I was moving from a different organization to this one, so I didn't really know like how this organization operated. And then having those like that packet of things that you found that were opportunities for optimization kind of put me in a better perspective, to have a better perspective of like where this organization is at in terms of the Oracle build, so that I kind of immediately knew how to compare it to the previous organization I was at. So that was really helpful to have that level of detail. And I don't know, do you still do that, or was that part of your previous role?
Some of all the kind of templates and things I created, but I don't do that as much anymore. I've been trying to do, one of my favorite things about working with this company in various roles is like I love talking to pharmacists and like our customers in general. Like there's obviously always areas of opportunity within, technology solutions to improve them in different ways and things we need to correct. But like I generally think that, the pharmacists I work with, yourself included, we're trying to do the right things for our patients and for our organization. And it's interesting to kind of learn about different ways in which patient care is facilitated and some of the different, considerations that organizations have when they're trying to set up technology solutions to support their workflows. So, I don't do the optimization assessments like I used to in the past in the same way, but, try to hopefully provide something that somebody can walk away with that's like, they can implement or take action on an easy to consume format, because like at the end of the day, you guys are all trying to ultimately improve patient care, and hopefully I can help in some small way to facilitate that.
Yeah, and I just want to repeat, thank you for helping with us with that, because those kind of things, having that kind of support from like an external eyes perspective is really helpful. Because sometimes, you're part of like the EHR side, you kind of know what the functions are available, and then we're on the side of like just trying to go through our day to day, not knowing fully what it's capable of. Like there are things that, we kind of like think is a good idea at the time, and then later on we realize, oh, we shouldn't have done that. And it's good to have those external eyes of someone who kind of knows better what the solution is capable of, with the, thought of like what things can come down the line. But yeah, and I kind of want to go back to, your role. You're specifically in that role of like product management now. And, for people who are kind of interested in moving into that space, whether they're like a student now, or maybe they're a pharmacist that is looking to get out from like the individual organization side, but looking to make a bigger impact on the healthcare like tech vendor side, what kind of advice would you want to give them?
One of the biggest things for me is just like an impetus for action. Like I think a lot of people, have a lot of like good ideas about ways in which we can improve technology solutions. I think like taking the next step of like, putting together like a business proposal or like a product requirements document, or like being more detailed on, what do I want to see change and what are some of the considerations associated with that. And then just like reaching out to people. Like, I mean, a lot of the work to do the investigation and write up some of these documents and things like that, we've got all these AI tools at our disposal now that make those processes a lot easier than they had been historically. So, I think doing the work to, try to go through that exercise, start reaching out to people, and, in general, kind of staying curious about the art of the possible and asking why questions, and trying to not only ask the why questions, but try to drive solutions, and then try to pick apart your own solutions. And, start that process. And it's a lot easier to show somebody what you've done than just tell them, right? So I think, with these different sorts of AI tools that are out there, not only can you write the, the requirements, and you can like think through, what sort of gaps you may have within your own thought process, but you can spin up a website quickly. You can spin up an app quickly that does something for, a market need within pharmacy or healthcare in general in ways that are unparalleled to anything we've experienced in the past. So, I'd say like try to lean in and do the work. And also, a lot of the folks that are listening have full-time jobs, right? So like, in order to make some of these career transitions, particularly if it's something you don't have a lot of experience in the past, like I would say, like do all the stuff I just said, but also like, it's going to require extra time to work on those things. It's going to require working, after your kids go to sleep or on the weekends to kind of spin this stuff up and set up a regimen and like time that is set aside to continue to iterate on those things and like make something out of nothing. So those would be kind of the biggest pieces, I guess.
Yeah, I like that whole notion of like just being like actionable and, spinning things up from nothing. I know that you just mentioned a little bit about AI. I do want to get your perspectives on like, with all these AI tools, there's this whole fear, right? There's this big fear of like AI replacing pharmacists, replacing, parts of our role as pharmacists. But, AI also have some positive outcomes of like, helping streamline processes and helping with certain tasks that doesn't really require like, clinical stuff, but more like administrative. And I'm wondering like from your side on the healthcare IT vendor side, like where do you kind of see the field going? And in relation to healthcare IT in general, or in relation to where pharmacy is going with the incorporation of these kind of different AI tools?
There's a lot of things that working with existing healthcare IT tools, we have an opportunity to make those things and the workflows far more efficient in general. So how do we be smarter about, the clinical decision support, or the ability to make sure the right products based on what the prescriber was ordering is dispensed to the patient, and to kind of minimize the additional kind of undue cognitive load that some of those processes may currently present. So how do we just kind of do things under the cover that automate some of those workflows is going to be, in my opinion, one of the first problems we should be trying to solve. Like how do we prevent the error from happening, and how do we reduce the number of manual steps that are required where those errors can occur? So, that's one thing. I think it's going to kind of evolve over time. part of the pharmacist, what we've been saying as a practice in the US, at least for the last 10, 20 years, is we want to have pharmacists increasingly engaged in different sorts of patient care activities beyond just, traditional medication dispensing, just making sure that the order is verified correctly and the product is dispensed correctly. We want to leverage all of these different skills that pharmacists have to operate at the top of our license. So, hopefully these AI tools can help to automate some of those basic aspects of the pharmacist workflow safely and intelligently, but allow us to have more time to engage in those different sorts of patient care activities that have that additional value add as well. I think there's also in general there are still regulatory considerations and a regulatory landscape around all this stuff that needs to evolve over time. So in addition to just AI overall, each state board of pharmacy has pharmacist to technician ratios that need to be maintained, for example. So I think there is always going to be, that additional buffer and support that we're getting from our state board of pharmacy, in addition to like all of the ability to kind of streamline some of the pharmacist workflow using AI as just a new tool within our technology kind of tool belt, if you will.
Thanks for sharing that. And I guess for the last part here, I just want to check with you, like if people wanted to reach out, if they want to ask me more about your like career or, questions about like how to get into like a role like yours, what's the best way they can reach you?
If you're a current customer, feel free to reach out to me on Org Health Communities, or if you have my email, feel free to do that. If not, or you don't have those connections for me, LinkedIn works as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for, just taking some time out I know you're super busy. So thank you so much for, being on a podcast here to share more about like, your career path, what you currently do, and, kind of your insights into like the future of healthcare IT. So thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pharmacy IT and Me podcast. If you did, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere you're listening to this podcast. It really helps us reach more people who might be interested in learning more about pharmacy informatics and technology. If you would like to suggest a topic or somebody to be on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me on social media. I can be best reached on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, technology is the tool, patient care is the goal.